All right, so we do have some folks coming in. So thank y'all so much for being with us again. I'm Kristen Linscott with Plano Public Library. We're really happy to have you with us today. Thanks for joining the class. We have the pleasure and the privilege of having with us Dr. McClain Watson today. He is a professor of business communications at the University of Texas at Dallas and is a part of the library as a volunteer and a leader. And let's see, I don't see anybody coming in at the moment. So Dr. Watson, why don't you go ahead and get started? Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. We had kind of two failure points there. My internet went out like 45 minutes ago, and then there were challenges with the Zoom meeting as well. So it's been rock solid for months. And of course it decides to go out, at the worst time. But again, thank you for that patience, and hopefully you'll get your money's worth here. I'm very glad to be with you all. And the last time I did this workshop was back in February, where of course we did it in person, and it was a different world at that point. And the concept of small talk is, I think, something that all of us have become less adept at recently. I know I have found it kind of curious how it's been difficult for me to talk to people recently, in the grocery store, or we don't go out very much, but I feel like I'm losing that skill just out of lack of practice. So maybe you feel similarly, and that's why you've decided to join. I always like to start, Kristen, if we could maybe advance the slide, or whoever's running that. Perfect. Yeah, I'd love to start by asking, why are you here? And I think we have a small enough group that it looks like people are muted, but it'd be great if
we start them off muted, but they have the capability to unmute. So if you want to call on people, or you want me to call on people to unmute, or if they want to raise their hand, we can do any of those things.
Okay, yeah. In my day job, I'll call on people, but here I think we'll let people volunteer. I'm just curious, why are you here? What makes you come to a Plano Library Effective Small Talk workshop? What is the purpose, or the goal in which, or the setting in which you want to create effective small talk? Please, anyone, chime in.
So hi, it's Vinita here.
Hi, Vinita.
Thank you for holding this class. So usually, and I speak a lot with my clients, but that is basically because I need to as a part of work. But if I get out of work and I have to have a small talk, for example, with my neighbors, or, I definitely want to make friends, but I don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm just here to understand, like, how do you make that small talk, and how do you, start a conversation so that you can take it further.
That's great. And I'm glad you contrasted kind of actual organic small talk, like with your neighbors, contrasted it with small talk at work, because I'm assuming at work you have kind of a script in your mind that you're kind of running through, and you may be more kind of on autopilot, or have a clearer sense of your goals in the interaction at work. But when you're out of that context, and when there really isn't kind of a larger purpose to the small talk, other than getting to know people and creating those relationships, and sometimes we find ourselves a little bit shorthanded, or unable to have those kind of interactions because we don't have that script. And it may be, hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll have a couple of things that you can, not a script exactly, but a couple of things to be thinking about as you are engaging with neighbors and people on the street, or other situations. So hopefully you'll have something to take away from this. But thanks a lot for that, Vanita. Looked like there's a comment maybe from Yolanda in the chat. Let me see if we can access that. Oh, good, a couple. Okay, Yolanda says, I'm here to get more skill at small talk because I've been off work since April and a little out of practice. Okay, absolutely, yeah. Well, the good part, Yolanda, is that we're all out of practice, like I said. So I don't know if there's that much of a deficit there, but it can absolutely be critical for creating those sorts of relationships, creating confidence in other people so that they will want to open a professional door for you. That's absolutely something that I emphasize a lot with my students, whether they're undergraduate students, MBA students, PhD students. I mean, you may have a ton of skills, but companies and organizations, there's a surplus of people who have skills. There's a real need for people who can relate and who can work in teams and who can kind of get along with other people. And small talk is such a big part of that. And as we'll see in a few minutes, the connection between small talk and listening and nonverbal behavior are all three of those are really kind of implicated in how other people see us. And coming at it through the topic of small talk is really kind of a doorway into all these other really critical communication skills that help us seem like people who know what they're doing, seem like people who can be trusted, seem like people who are likable or interesting to be around. And whether it's kind of getting to know your neighbors, or it's trying to create professional opportunity, seeming like you know what you're doing, seeming like you're trustworthy and are interesting to be around are critical for both of those. Yeah, interviews, absolutely. Yeah, there's always, the interview again is another situation where, the interviewer has a script, they have questions. If they work in HR, then they interview people all day, every day. So usually in an interview, those first, that first minute or two can be important for creating that feeling of warmth and that feeling of kind of human connection before they start the script. And really, when we're thinking about small talk, we're thinking about those first couple moments, which help us to go deeper into conversation, as we'll see in a few minutes. Any other input from folks? So we've got professional reasons for thinking about improving at small talk. We've got more small talk with outside of a professional context. Anybody else? I would say, holiday season's coming up and we're going to be getting with family and maybe there's some relatives that you don't know very well, but you're in the same room, and how do you connect with them? But that's, probably not going to happen for most people this holiday season. So it's very strange. I found myself not as adept at small talk um, or driving. I find that I can't drive very well. I'm out of practice. Anyway, anybody else want to chime in? Let me look here in the chat. Starting a new business? Okay, absolutely. Um, of course, with customers or clients, the small talk is critical there, especially if it's relationship-based sales sort of business. But with potential investors as well, you need to seem, again, likable and relatable, and investors need to be able to identify with you and your goals. And that can come across partially through charts in Excel, but a lot of it has to do with your facial expression, with how you greet people, with how you make people feel comfortable. All right, Caesar says, I like to get straight to business when talking to people, but most people need to ease in to more rigorous conversation. Yes. When I try to engage in small talk, it comes off as awkward. Okay. Well, if we were in person, Caesar, I'd want to hear more detail about what you mean it comes off as awkward, because I think a lot of us, kind of have our own sense of what's awkward and have our own certainly experience with that. But if you would like to expound on that a little bit in the chat, I think maybe others could relate to that. But that's what we want. Small talk is intended to be warm, intended to be friendly, intended to be something that you do with a smile on your face. And so, yeah, if we aren't getting those signals back from the other person, then that certainly is demotivating, to say the least. Okay, maybe we go to the next slide here. Perfect. All right. So we'll get to the definition here in a minute. And obviously there's lots of definitions of small talk. But if we can just advance one more here, I think the best short, simple example, or sorry, definition that I've come across here is polite conversation about unimportant things. And I think there's a couple of words in this brief definition that are maybe worth thinking through here. The first is polite, because like I was saying, you know, in a way, regardless of what you talk about or how it happens, the goal for most people with small talk is to create that feeling of warmth and relatability, so that when the person is walking away from the conversation with you, then they have, again, a warm feeling about you. And so typically we kind of associate that with polite conversation. Um, we also typically engage in small talk with people who we don't know very well. And so, you know, when you live with someone or have known someone for many, many years, or even a few months, then, you know, you're still being polite generally, but we typically associate polite conversation with people who we don't know very well. And we're trying to create a certain sort of impression in conversation with them. So I think not just the polite factor there, but the idea that we are trying to create, again, that feeling of warmth. Which I think connects to the second thing here, which is the phrase unimportant things. And this is, of course, why we would call it small talk, because we tend to think that the stuff we talk about when we're engaging in small talk is not important. And that's kind of by design. You know, if you think about trying to seem relatable to someone, seem likable, seem friendly, then it's easier to do that when you're talking about the small stuff. And we'll get to some, you know, common small talk topics in a bit. But the unimportant things, I think, we don't want to. We don't want to. How do I put this? Take that the wrong way, because it may be the case that the things we're talking about are relatively unimportant, but the whole point of small talk is important and meaningful and matters. So it's one of those kinds of communication where the, you know, we tend to think about communication as being about information transfer, and of course, especially in a workplace setting, it is primarily about that. But we tend to overlook the relational part of communication and how we are creating and sustaining relationships through all communication. But especially in small talk, we're thinking about things not because we're transmitting critical information to someone, but because we're, again, trying to create that feeling of likability, that sense of connection, and that sense that, you know, it may not go deeper, and that's fine. It's been a pleasant interaction. But of course, small talk can lead to large talk or big talk about things. And especially as you're trying to cultivate clients or customers in a workplace setting, or trying to create a relationship with people like neighbors or people who are part of an organization that you just joined or something like that, then this is really, really critical stuff. So let's move forward. Maybe one more slide, please. All right. So purpose. Already got about this a little bit, and that was something that was helpful in the comments that you made earlier about why you're here. So business relationships, obviously critical. Family relationships. We tend to think of our friends as people that we maybe don't need to engage in very much small talk with, but of course we do. And especially in these days when you may not be communicating with people as regularly as you used to. Um, I've certainly found that to be the case, even though I can call people and we have, you know, a Zoom kind of happy hour with friends once a week. I still feel isolated and feel disconnected. And so the purpose of small talk is to create those connections, but when we don't have them often, then again, we can feel, I think we're all feeling the loss of that. But the purpose of small talk ultimately is, again, to create that relationship, to engage someone in a way that creates confidence and likability in their mind when they think of you. And so we're going to get kind of specific here because I've got 3 topics that I want to talk through about small talk to kind of give you some, they're not really in the form of tips, but they're kind of things to think about. Because if there's anything we know about small talk is that it's much more likely to be effective if you are thinking about it as you are doing it and before you do it. So that sense of intentionality. Um, we're all in conversations, or we all have been in conversations which kind of didn't really go anywhere. And a lot of times that's not because we're not good at small talk, it's just because we didn't plan. We didn't think about it ahead of time. We didn't um, kind of have something in mind that we wanted to say to the other person when we approached them, for example, at a social gathering or at a community event. So planning what you're going to talk about and, intentionally going into an interaction with the goal of having an effective interaction and having an effective small talk interaction is a really key part of it. No one is just good at this, or I shouldn't say no one, but it's rare that you find someone who is just kind of good at this naturally. Everybody can improve, and I appreciate and honor, you wanting to improve at this, but it takes planning and it takes observation in order for us to give ourselves a better chance of. Now, let me go to, I think we had a comment here. Let me see if I can. Yolanda says, yeah, my friends and I are almost learning each other in a new way because we're used to doing things together versus being on the phone as much. Yes, that's so good. And of course, this is a universal feeling these days. And I should have said at the beginning, but I hope that you and your families are doing well, and I wish you all the best as we move into the winter months. So anyway, again, I should have said that first. But the idea here is that engaging in small talk is helpful to us. It's helpful either from a kind of relationship standpoint. It could be something that leads to a business opportunity or professional engagement as well. So let's get to that first thing that I mentioned before. If we can maybe go to the next slide here. All right, 3 components. All right, one more. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So I mentioned planning. And this, I think, is really important, this first point, because again, you don't just roll in. It would be, obviously there's a lot of differences between a small talk conversation and a job interview. But in the same way that we don't just roll into a job interview without having done any research, without having planned out any answers to the obvious questions that we're going to be asked, we're not going to want from today forward to roll into a small talk interaction without having already a couple things in mind, without having observed primarily through listening, through visual observation, certain things that we might pick up on and use to create that interaction. So that's all it's a kind of research in a way, although that makes it seem a little bit too fancy. But the best example here is when you are in public space, or it could be in, your nephew's house for holiday, if you're going to do that, and you see someone that you don't really know, okay, or you see someone that you should know better than you do, either because they're part of your family or because, it's maybe one of your spouse's friend or something like that. Okay, so you've got, all right, I'm going to go over and talk to this person. So, but before you do that, watch and look, what are they wearing? how's their hair? You know, I'm not saying, do you like it or not? I'm saying, what are some things about how they're self-presenting that maybe I can use as a springboard to small talk? If you are going into, again, a lot of these examples, you know, put us into actual social spaces with other humans, which we're not supposed to be doing. So forgive me if the examples are a little bit not as timely as they could be. But if you go to someone else's house, for example, or go into someone else's office, or you see them wearing the sweatshirt of a particular sports team, you know, this is the kind of information that you can use to fold into an opening comment. Like, oh, are you a big, you know, well, Cowboys is obvious, but, you know, especially if it's something that's a little bit, you know, unusual around here. I grew up in North Carolina. I didn't go to University of North Carolina, but I saw someone wearing a UNC sweatshirt in the store a few weeks ago. And, you know, it's different, you know, it's unique. You're not used to seeing that. So I went up and asked them, "Oh, you're a Tar Heel fan?" And they were like, "Yeah." And so anyway, something like that, you know, or someone's socks or someone's brooch, or, you know, observing the environment, listening and looking can be extremely helpful for you as you're trying to create this kind of interaction, because you're going in with something. You're not going in with nothing and expecting something to happen between you and a stranger. You have a comment that you want to make. And this works with complete strangers. It also works with people who maybe you don't know personally very well, but you know, want to be friendly to at work, for example. Um, and I think probably all of us know people who are um, good at this, you know, who kind of, a lot of times what it sounds like is you're giving someone a compliment. It's like, oh, wow, I really like those socks, or God, that bracelet's really cool. Or, you know, I got a comment last week about some pants that I was wearing, which, you know, you think is kind of weird, but they're kind of cool pants. And so the point is, if you're a compliment giver, then that can be a great way to begin a small talk interaction, because it kind of flows naturally from that. Oh, you know, where'd you get it? Or, oh, how long have you had it? Or, God, I got to get some socks like that. Where'd you get those? And then, you know, the conversation can kind of build on itself from that. So the key point first is observation. Look, you know, observe. If you, um, again, you're not, this is important, you're not judging the other person, really. You're not, again, it's not a question of whether you like it or not. It's just something in their environment or something that they expressly decided to wear, for example, that you can be a really powerful opening to that conversation. And again, it gives you something to say that can be, you know, really helpful. Um, one great way to practice this is to, when you're at the grocery store, is to engage in small talk with people who are checking you out, or other workers in a store, because they're used to talking to people, strangers, all the time, answering questions, stuff like that. But in the checkout line, again, it's a, you know, you're in proximity to that person for a couple minutes usually, and it's a great, you know, they're used to it. They're probably pretty good at it. But you might, you know, people sometimes say, well, how can I practice this? And again, that's a great place to practice the small talk, because the stakes are really low and you're not trying to sell them something. You're not trying to be their friend, but it just, they are usually pretty good at it and are able to kind of accommodate your need for a practice partner. And you may start by looking at what they're wearing or their earrings or something like that. Um, and so anyway, that's just a suggestion there for something to do as practice. But again, observation is key. You want to go in with something. It's too much to expect for you to create a common ground after the first couple of things you say to one another, right? That's very unlikely to happen. So if you go in with something, it can be really helpful. Also at you know, it's not just like what people are wearing, but it's where they are. So if I'm in a Guitar Center, you know, you could make a lot of assumptions about people who are in Guitar Center, right? They are into music, or they play instruments, or, they want to be part of the scene, or, whatever, right? If someone is in the aisle looking at cat food, again, you can make assumptions about that. And the idea, again, is that we're being observant to that. We're looking for opportunities to engage people. And because people engage in other ways than talking, primarily through, again, what they're wearing, where they are, what they're doing, then we can use that in our conversation with them to help us. Now, Kristen, I don't know if the video is possible there, but I have a video here that is about active listening here, and I don't know if we can play that, if the sound will come through, but maybe we can give that a try if folks can be even more patient than they already have been.
McClain, are you on your computer?
No, I'm on my phone, unfortunately, because the internet's out.
Give it a try. I mean, in the computer version of this, there's an option that shares your computer's audio as well as the video. But see what you can do.
Well, I think Krista's running the slides, or someone else is running the slides.
That is true.
So I don't know if I think.
Okay, I think I had to unmute myself. Here, let me share again. I was getting it to play, but I couldn't tell if it was coming through.
Okay.
So let me know if you're seeing it. Can you see it?
Yes, can see it.
Okay, let me rewind and see if it will play now. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm getting some audio, but I don't know if maybe if others can add to the chat if they're hearing it clearly. If not, I will be happy to paste that link, or maybe Kristen can paste that link to the video in the chat.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
not coming through. The audio
Okay.
is not coming through clearly.
Nobody's
Okay.
hearing it?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
All right.
very low.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe
Okay.
we can.
I'll put it into the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, anyway, if we were to see this video, we would get a really useful tip for observing. And the video is really neat because it actually shows someone in a public space approach a total stranger and have a nice kind of interaction with this person, where each of them came away from that interaction, feeling good and kind of walking away with that sort of small talk feeling that you always want to walk away with. So anyway, I recommend watching that. And that whole channel is called the Charisma Coach. And I found it to be really, useful and very practical videos. I show a few of them in class. So anyway, I recommend it to you. Of course, there's a lot of stuff about small talk on YouTube. So there's, an entire education that's possible there. Okay, maybe if we can go to the second point, Kristen, that would be great. Okay, perfect.
I think we've got it now. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. Okay, so the second thing, all right, so we're observing, right? And that is primarily a cognitive activity, right? That's something that we do kind of with our mind. We look, we think, we listen, and we are actively trying to notice things in the environment that can be useful or could be useful for creating that, for breaking the silence, for example, or continuing the conversation with someone. So the second thing is more behavioral. This is something not that we do in our mind or think about, but something that we do with our body. And of course, this is a huge factor in all human communication, is what your body is doing. We are not just brains in a jar, or mouths, speaking words. We are full bodies, and the other person is, well, one way to put it is our bodies are sending signals just nonstop, hundreds of them every second, send signals out into the world, and other people do something with that in their mind. They use those signals and put them together in a way that creates their impression of us. So when we think about small talk, we don't just want to think about the words that come out of our mouth. We want to think about what we're doing with our body. And so this is where you get into this, there's this whole field of kind of human communication research that was really a big deal in the 60s and 70s, called the study of proxemics, Proxemics, proxemics. And the idea is that, again, your physical relationship to another person is an important form of human communication. It's an important form of nonverbal communication. And here again, we see a little bit of friction because we're not supposed to be close to people. We're not supposed to be, moving around large groups of people like you would do at a networking event, for example, or at a family gathering. So here again, we're frustrated by this, and this is something that's put kind of a damper on our ability to engage other folks in small talk. But it will end at some point. We will be we will be back together again at some point. And so just as you think now before you act, you also want to be factoring into your communication impact what you're doing with your body. So how you're standing in relation to the other person, whether you're standing or not. Typically what you want to do with small talk is you want to try to mirror the nonverbal positioning of the other person. So if they are sitting, then you sit. If they are standing and you're sitting, then you stand. You want to observe the rotation of their shoulders. Are they a bit closed off, or are they fully facing you? And again, we're mirroring. We're not trying to guide the other person to do what we're doing. We are adapting to them, because that is going to make us more relatable, but also less of a threat kind of in their mind. This is very primal. And the sorts of behaviors that we want to do when we're engaging strangers are exactly the same sorts of behaviors that the advanced primates do, in the jungles of Rwanda. The same sorts of behavior, the same sorts of things that appear threatening in that context with, again, gorillas. It's the same with us. It's very interesting. But there are things we can do with our body that, again, create calling it a safe space is a little strange, but create that physical environment where other people feel comfortable opening up to us. And this is, again, not something that people are used to doing in public or with strangers. And so we want to use that physicality as a resource for helping us accomplish our goals. So again, I think from a business standpoint, what you're doing primarily is standing if they're standing, sitting if they're sitting, not getting too close, but not being too far away. And I know that there's no easy answer there with that. That's what makes human communication so interesting, but also so kind of frustrating, is that there's no one right way to do any of this stuff. And so it is absolutely possible to be too close to someone. And you may have seen, scenes in TV shows about, close talkers and people who just kind of, for comedic effect, get close. You also see people who are too far away. And so all of the stuff we think about with nonverbal communication, we want to be, again, factoring into our overall impression. We want to not just be subject to whatever our body is doing in that moment. We want to be intentional about it. And so again, just as we're observing our environment and looking for opportunities to engage, we are also, as we approach someone or as we begin speaking, we are thinking not just about the words that come out of our mouth, but also about how our body is positioned in relation to theirs. All right, number 3 here.
Did you have a video on this one too? Because I'm just realizing I may be able to make a change in my settings to let people see the video.
Okay, yeah, there is
Want
one
me to
down there.
try?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm down. Sorry for making it so small. I was, originally going to be running these, so I apologize for making it small.
I
And
think
I know.
it's the settings in Zoom in my audio
Mhm.
that I think that I should be able to. Okay, I'm going to try it and we'll.
Okay.
Can you see it?
No, I can't. I can hear something, but I can't really see anything.
Is anyone else seeing it?
I'm not, Kristen. If you can send, is it a link?
Yeah, I'll put the link in again. Sorry
Yeah.
about that, folks.
That's probably the best way to view these anyway, I think. Not optimum, but for right now.
Okay, so the last item here is, so if we can go maybe one more slide, Kristen, to number 3. Can we take the slide one more, Kristen, to number 3? Oh, perfect. All right. Now, this is where, most of the time we start when we think about small talk is what we actually say. And of course, that is important. And we want to be thoughtful about the topics that we're addressing and how we're addressing those. So we will talk about that, but I do think it's, important in a way to understand that what we say is not everything, is not the most important thing even. It's your intention going into it, based on observation, based on finding things to address or to speak to before you engage, thinking through what you're doing with your body, and then finally, again, the topic. Because sometimes the topic will change, and the topic will kind of curve and bend, and that's good. That's a good sign when you go beyond that first, God, it's really hot today, to someone else. If you can sustain interaction for 2 or 3 more exchanges, then you're starting to go beyond small talk and get to, something that is richer and more interesting. But we all know the typical topics for small talk. And the funny thing is that these topics have been, oh, there's Janie. Janie. She's a new acquisition, 18 months, about 60-pound greyhound. She's very sweet. Anyway, back to small talk. So we know all the kind of common topics here. And again, if we were in person, we would just kind of all shout them out together, but I'll just do that here. Of course, we've got the weather. And, we've got sports, we've got what day it is. So where we are in the calendar matters. So for example, Halloween, right? So stuff in the calendar can be a really helpful, I guess, kind of topic for small talk. And these have been the case for thousands of years. Okay, and back in ancient Greece, you can find records of conversation, and even someone like Socrates would engage in small talk at the beginning of his dialogues. written, or transcribed by Plato. And so it's really interesting to see that, there's really no innovation occurring when it comes to small talk topics. These are just baked into human psychology. And so you might think from that means we should try to innovate, or we should try to do something different because these old kind of topics are cliched or worn out. But like I said, that's not the case. They persist because they work. They persist because they are things that all human animals can relate to: weather, calendar, sports. I think someone mentioned news topics. Yeah, Yolanda mentioned news topics. And of course, that's less clear cut, So certainly if you're talking about a news topic like a hurricane, like the one that went through Louisiana recently, then that would be a good topic for a small talk. If you were to talk about the response by the local officials to that hurricane, then that makes it a little risky, because at that point you're talking about kind of how well or not people are doing their job. And again, that tends to be the sort of topic that you could certainly discuss a lot with someone that you knew well. But when we're talking about small talk, we're typically talking about folks that we're not quite there with them yet. So again, talking about a natural weather event is safe, but again, talking about the response to that weather event from an official standpoint, or what this or that politician said about it, again, that's kind of getting into the more tricky territory. But back to the calendar thing, again, this is not just about kind of holidays. Kind of every day or most days of the week have small talk topics that are kind of attached to them. So when it's a Monday, and again, this is different here too, because days of the week kind of don't quite mean what they did, in the before time where everybody was physically going to work or, doing things collectively outside the home. But typically speaking, and we'll get back to this, I'm sure, but on a Monday, right? What's the instant small talk question, right? And of course, the question is a great thing to start a small talk conversation with. How was your weekend, right? Monday, right? So we're just coming off the weekend. How was your weekend? Wednesday, right? Oh man, hump day. God, I can't wait for this week to be over, right? That's the sort of thing you could say kind of to anybody. Thursday or Friday, what can you say? What are your plans for the weekend? Doing anything fun? Right. So, and again, look, those are obvious and kind of cheesy when I'm just saying them kind of out of context, but they can be very useful to you. And if you work in a place that's got, a decent number of people, then, you can use the same sorts of openings with a lot of people, it doesn't get worn out, So again, the point is with these small talk interactions, even though you're talking about something that is maybe not all that important, the point of the interaction is not to communicate important information. It's to create and sustain a relationship. And we have these even at school, like with breaks and stuff like that. Oh, how was your break? You hear that in the halls, or you used to hear that in the halls, for a whole kind of week or two after like winter break or summer break. So finding those opportunities, whether they're in the calendar, whether there's something that's going on kind of nationally that everybody's aware of, big sporting events, even if you don't really care about sports, can be a great opening as well. I'd love to hear what other folks have as their kind of go-to topics in the chat if anybody wants to share. Obviously, in a business setting, the stakes are higher, and you could potentially, I mean, it's probably pretty rare, but you could potentially alienate a possible customer or client by kind of straying too far from the generic small talk topics, which I think is why a lot of people in relationship oriented businesses like sales tend to not do that. They tend to stick to kind of the pretty obvious small talk topics, and it can seem a little bit a little bit tired sometimes, and they get tired of it. But when the stakes are high, you're going to probably not want to get into the things that people may have different opinions about. So everybody can agree when it's too hot, when it's too cold. Even sometimes if it's not too hot to you, but it is hot to someone else, then that could be that could be a generator. Yeah, no politics or religion, typically. And again, it's not to say that you can't talk about that stuff with people who you know well. It's just that you're almost by definition not talking with people you know well when you're engaging in small talk. So again, and maybe this is the best illustration of how much it's not about the information, it's about the relationship. So you kind of write off entire topics or entire universe of topics because it could potentially make that relationship more difficult to generate. Any other topics there that folks have as their go-to? I mean, obviously the topic, of the past, 7 or 8 months is COVID, and of course we have the election going on, and it's it's one of those things that's kind of strange to engage in small talk about, because people have, as crazy as it is to say, people have different opinions about a virus and what should be done about that. And it's gotten so wrapped up into these topics, or into these topics that typically you would avoid at all costs. It's also kind of interesting in a way, because you almost have to get a little bit personal now sometimes, more personal than I would definitely avoid the election, Karen, just for your own sanity. But I was in a small talk kind of conversation with a friend of one of my kids who's 17, and I talked to her friend's mom a couple times, but not for very long. And so this was kind of our first conversation, and we were talking about trying to find a way to get them together, to have kind of an outing just at the park. So really low key, but you kind of have to ask personal questions almost. Like, are you masking? Are you eating out at restaurants? Are you taking this seriously? And it's the sort of thing that you would never, it's just a level of personal information that you would usually not get into at all, but you find yourself kind of needing to ask those questions these days, because it's could be critical information. Oh, that's good, Kristen. Yeah, it seems like the store is really busy. Yolanda, I think people are giving more generic and more superficial info about the election. Yes, more like, isn't this a crazy time? Yes, and that is actually a really, good thing to say. Isn't this a crazy time? Guy, everything's, and we've all gotten used to kind of bad mouthing, 2020. That, is something that I think we can all relate to. It's just this, time where there's just so many wild things going on, and everybody is worn out, and they're just tired and aggravated, and so yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about common ground, I think trashing 2020 is probably the safest thing you could possibly do. avoiding judgment or strong opinion, asking people their experiences or perspectives. Yeah. Again, I think when it comes to the topics and what you actually say in conversation, again, you're going to be a little bit safer, I think, just from a conversational standpoint, if you do those first two things that we talked about. If you have observed, if you are kind of using your best judgment in the situation as far as, putting the pieces and signals together about this stranger and kind of wondering, should I ask this person their opinion about something, um, because sometimes you can get that wrong and you find yourself 10 minutes later wishing you didn't ask the person's opinion about this or that. But this is something that you get better at. And so just coming back to those three items: listening, observing, thinking about your body. Thank you. And also, again, you know really leaning into those generic topics. Oh, thank you, Karen, for coming. I really appreciate that. Yeah, where I'm wrapping up here. Again, I'm mindful of your time, and I know we were supposed to end at 3 and do not want to trot on your patience anymore. But hopefully, again, thinking about more than just what do I talk about gives you something that you can factor in and start using, today, tomorrow, the next day, because even though we don't do it as much as we used to, we still have these opportunities to engage with people. And I think if anything now, we all need human connection, and we all, I think could maybe benefit more from those small interactions that we have with people. One, because that's probably all we're going to get for the time being, but also, again, because we're so starved for human connection. Maybe it's just me, but I don't think so. I think a lot of us feel this way, that these small nice moments, where you're reminded that, yeah, I don't want to think about other human beings simply as people who could get me sick. I want to remember that we're all in this together, that we're all struggling, and that if we can kind of extend a little bit of kindness through small talk to other people, or to create that kind of engagement, then we're just kind of doing something good in the world. And I think, again, we all kind of need that these days. Yolanda says, or maybe asking for suggestions for celebrating the holidays. Yeah, that's good. That's true. Of course, holidays is the right word here, because there's a lot of holidays, a lot of different holidays. And so, um, uh, you know, you wouldn't want to assume necessarily what holiday the person was referring to or was themselves celebrating. But it can be a great chance to learn something. And, that's what the best small talk, I think, does. You're learning about the person primarily, but if you can learn about topics and learn about someone's life experience, then again, those are the interactions that I really come across or walk away from feeling most kind of edified by. Anyway, though, I really appreciate you coming. I appreciate your patience with the technology. This is a first for me, doing one of these on holding my phone. I hope it hasn't been too jittery, and I'm definitely not in the environment that I would like to be doing one of these workshops, but we're all getting by. And anyway, I hope that you can take away these 3 things. I do hope you watch the links that we shared, because they are useful. And again, there's a whole universe of stuff about this on YouTube. It can be, YouTube is a great library for this kind of very practical stuff. And you don't have to like all of it, but there's a lot of stuff out there. So maybe that might be the next step for you as you're working on these things. But anyway, I wish you and your families all the best. I hope that you have, a nice couple months. Go out and vote if you haven't done that. I think today's the last day for early voting. But anyway, take care, everybody, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks again for
And I'll
coming.
say the libraries are open for voting. We have the voting
Yeah.
at the library. So we're happy to have you. And the libraries are also open to check things out and to come in and use the computer. So we're glad to have you for that as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Watson, for being with us today, and for the fun conversation. And thanks y'all for hanging in there with us with our technical difficulties.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Take care. Have a good weekend.